Okay.
Also, Deacon, it seems that some people are having a hard time accessing the documents from today, the units for today's course. Are they unlocked yet, or are we unlocking them after today?
Here, let me make sure. It's not. Let's see now. Okay. So these are the unit 3, and I'll be unlocking them, but let me double check if in our, you probably are seeing what I'm doing, but I have to double check it that the unit itself is, there it is. So publish. Oh,
And just while we're waiting for this, we had been talking after our last class, and we think that as a lot of you already are utilizing, we want to be able to answer your questions in live time. And sometimes it's difficult when we're needing to finish a unit that we're talking about. And so that's a really good use for the chat feature. If you're able to use that, if you can select so the question is sent to everyone, so everyone will be able to see the question you're sending. Or if it's a question you simply want to ask one other person, you can select that person's name. And then we can answer those questions more in real time while also still being able to keep teaching without interruption. So obviously, if you have something that's very pressing, and we're never going to tell you to not ask the question, but the chat feature is really helpful for that.
yes, absolutely. Yes. Of course, we don't want to not allow for the quick question, but I think what might happen is sometimes we end up like we did a little bit, we ran out of a little time last time. We should be able to catch up though today pretty well. I was going to invite Sally to kind of um, describe this session, and then after we describe this unit, we're going to look at some of that background information and the quizzes that you took.
Okay. Well, let's just run through this one. This is unit 3 on differences. Deacon Santi, do you want to pick 2 people to read the good and the challenge?
Okay. Let's see if I can. How about Nanette? Would you mind reading the good?
Sure. Men and women are created in the image of God, equal in dignity but complementary.
Okay. And how about let's go with Dory. Could you read the challenge?
Respecting our differences.
All right. So this is going to be about class 3 or 4. And this is a time when it's a good idea to set out a question box, an anonymous question box. And I just created this box with question marks all over it. And it's for the kids to ask whatever the question they would like, and they don't have to put their name on it. And it really is a useful tool to see where the kids are. And it really is quite amazing what kinds of questions they ask. Anyway, we put the question box out for every class starting at this unit. All right, so let's move on. So objective 1 is to share the findings of grandparents and parents' views of males and females. You always review the homework, usually when they get back. And this makes for a great discussion. What I do at this class is, or at this objective, usually I have about 8 kids in the class, and we just share. I have them share all of their answers and what it was like interviewing the grandparents and the parents. And the parents and grandparents really do have a lot of interesting things to say, real fun things to say. And the girls end up sharing, and then we talk and they compare, and it's fun for them to see, oh my gosh, my mom said the same thing, or my grandmother, can you believe this is what it was like back then? So it's I really like these discussions, especially from the home, the conversations that we're having at home. Deacon Santi and Molly, do you have anything to add here? Have you had experiences with this?
I'll let Molly go if she has.
Oh, nothing beyond what you added. It's
Okay.
the students like it.
Yeah, it is. It's fun to just have the discussions.
My experience, Liz, is that I have also students from different cultures, from different educational levels. So I have people from India, people from Africa, people from Mexico. So it's been really, really interesting.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Liz, are you teaching in public schools?
I don't know. For you.
Okay.
She teaches
All right.
at a Catholic school, but she also teaches at a clinic.
Okay.
So she has a couple of different, and plus she teaches at the college level a holistic sexuality course as well. So she has a
Oh,
vast
perfect.
array of experience. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I teach the postpartum moms too, which actually put our class off for 2 hours so we could do this, but they'll be coming in this afternoon and I'll be doing Teen Star for these moms too.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I would love to be able to bring this into a public school setting. All right. So let's move on to, so objective 2, to identify some of the biological differences between males and females. And this is a fun one to start with. So you ask the students, okay, who has a circulatory system? And everybody raises their hands. What about a respiratory system? Everybody raises their hands. Digestive system, nervous system, muscular system. And then you let it, you kind of got to let it, the time pass here so they think about it. And then you end with, who has a reproductive system? And they all raise their hands. And this is where you stop and you say, well, really not true. You don't have an independently operating reproductive system. And I like to say, what do you think that means? And they're just, they look at each other and they don't really understand. And so you just start to discuss, the reality of the fact that their reproductive systems are not independent. They are complementary, that it's not, they can't really function and operate on their own. And you ask, why do you think that is? And then they get to the point that, okay, yes, it's the complementarity of a male and a female, and the ability to reproduce and to have a baby. And so it's a fun opportunity for them to really start to think a little bit more critically about their physical nature, and that it is not just meant for themselves. Okay, so Molly, you have anything to add to that? Do you do anything different? Okay, so all right, so at this point, then we hand out the diagram of the reproductive anatomy. And these classes, by the way, are taught separately. And the diagram you'll see is very, well, I think you've already gotten it. It's very simple drawing, and you see if this, and you give it out to the students. So what I do is I hand it out to the students and see if they can fill it out, and they're more than welcome to work together in pairs. And you let them just sit it out for a little bit, and they really, some girls can fill out some of the parts, but most of them can't fill out all of the parts. I couldn't even fill out all of the parts. I could fill out a few when I was taking the training. And so it's a fun time to play a game here. So I have, in the past, I've written the labels on one set of index cards and the definitions on another, and had the girls work together at pairing them. The other option is, once they sit in front of the diagram and they're looking and they're trying to fill out, then I write all of the I've done both of this and they both work equally well. You write all the terms on the board and then you let them see if they can fill them out. And then we sit down together and we really review all of the terms and all of the definitions and talk about that. Molly or Deacon, do you have anything to add there?
There's just different ways that you can do this according to the audience you have. The younger they are, that probably even middle schoolers are going to have less of a vocabulary. They probably are not at the level of biology in a high school that a high school student might have. And so in those cases, it's okay to for example, give them a list of words that they can then use to match at first. But some of the idea here is to try to get them to understand that there are things we do want them to realize that they don't know as much as they think they know. And part of it is because we know that they're getting a lot of information from other sources, right? That are not necessarily mom and dad or even the school itself. So let them understand that a little bit, and then go through the proper names as well. So that's kind of what I would add.
Yeah, and always, the note to instructor here talks about the importance of, to discuss modesty in words. And we talk about, it's an opportunity also to say, look, girls, I know you have heard a lot of slang terms in relation to our body parts. And sometimes I'll even ask, what have you heard? What have you heard? Why do you think we have these slang terms for our body parts? What do you think that tells you about yourself? Do you think it's a positive thing when you hear these terms? And so you just keep asking, you keep drawing out. And then we just talk about the importance of we are such beautiful creations from God. So why is it that we use these terms to sort of degrade who our humanity, our body parts, who we are? So let's just think critically here, and let's decide here and now that we are going to use, proper terms for ourselves. We have to see ourselves in this way. So I also, before I start every unit, I like to talk about the past units. Okay, this is what we've done so far. We've thought a little bit more critically about what we're being exposed to in the media. We've had some discussions with our parents and grandparents. So now here we are, we're going to think a little bit more critically about our physical being, who we are. So I think it's a good exercise just to, before you start each unit, just review a little bit. Here we are. This is what we're doing. Okay, now, how does this relate to our whole person? Let's go back to the star. What are the 5 points to the star? How is it going to relate to what we're about to learn? You'll begin to get an idea of how you want to do it. But I think it's a good practice to just sort of review before you start each new unit. Okay. And then I guess we're at the end here.
Yes.
So yeah, and then the fun part of this is they've learned the diagrams, they've worked them out, you've had the discussions, and then they get to bring home a blank diagram for their parents. They get to give the test to their parents. And I always say, now be gentle with them. Don't, just say, oh, Mom, let's see if you can try to fill this out. And they love to do that. They love to be. And then I do send I let the kids take home the definitions. And so it's another opportunity for the child and the parent to talk about the definitions, and the child gets to show the parent the definitions. And so there we go. That's the end of this particular unit. This is a good one. I really like this one to get them started.
Yeah.
All right. anything to add, Molly or Deacon Santi?
The only thing I would add is a logistical thing, and that you might be surprised by the number of parents who don't participate in the homeworks that involve the parents. I was surprised that not all the parents would do those kinds of activities. And so the way I try to handle it is when the students say that the parents didn't get a chance to go over the survey or to go over the diagram with them, just to encourage them to try again the next week and encourage them to try it again the next week instead of just letting it go. Just keep
Yeah.
trying, and then eventually the parents will participate. Sometimes some actually won't, but just keep with it. And
It's nice in a school setting because I can tell them that participation in these home assignments is vital and necessary, and they're going to be graded on it, even though they're not really going to be graded on it. I tell them it's going to be a part of their grade, so that helps. And then the girls that in the homeschool class, they're just a little bit more proactive. Also, what helps and is after every unit, and I know Molly does this, and Deacon Santi, and I know Liz, I'm sure, you write an email to the parents after every unit, and you review what you had covered in class. And also I will say to the parents, like at this unit, by the way, be prepared, your students are going to bring home a quiz for you, and you communicate to the parents that about the importance of just their participation too. So it's another avenue to include the family into this.
Yeah, so very good, very good. And of course, you hopefully, those of you that already took the quiz, and I apologize, there was a little mistake in the figures the last time, but I fixed that. So please go ahead and take those quizzes 2A and 2B if you haven't done that. And but they're based on these diagrams here that you can see. And in the Canvas, we have copies of these so that you can always use them to make more copies. You will be getting an actual manual with the actual picture of it as you complete the course. But it would have all of these with the blanks for them to, and then also a answer key if you want to that corresponds. So each number corresponds to these numbers, and it has the function of each one. And so we have for the female and then for the male, and we have some supplementary diagrams as well. Okay. Obviously there's going to be some, one of you I think was asking about, do we give the function? Yes. Don't necessarily get as technical as the handout gives it, but you may want to go over it with them and explain it to them. If you have enough time, for example, one thing that you can do is you can copy this diagram and blank out the function, or blank out the structure and give the function and see if they can actually fill it out.
Really quickly, I have gone back and forth on whether or not to give the male and the female diagrams at this lesson, because I do a class. As you'll see coming up, there's a class that I teach on the male as well. But I really think it works well to show both of these diagrams together, because then it's not so, what's the right word? Then the girls are just, they're seeing matter of factly the diagram of the male, matter of factly the diagram of the female. It's together. They're both, the beautiful scientific diagrams of who we are as human beings. And so I do like to do these together in the same class, so that it doesn't become something to be uncomfortable with. But you all consider just read your own class. I've done it both ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and at the same time, it also emphasizes that complementarity that we started with, because you already asked them, do you have a a complete reproductive system. And by showing both of them, it really drives the point home. And I know today there's such confusion about that. And so what you want to try to do is really say, look, these are the reproductive systems that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're tempted just to show one, that's my advice would be to show both for this reason, because I've done it both times and I really like showing them both.
Yeah. Were you able to take a look at the video on sex differences that I posted on Canvas?
Yes.
Sex differentiation? Okay. Any questions about that particular presentation?
I have one, Deacon Santi. By the way, I really loved it. I loved your intro, and especially after the conversation last class, how this is just a respectful way of just educating, from the biological, anyway, it was great. One question I have is there some line or caveat, with your teaching experience that would be helpful to, for example, I know a common argument is, oh, well, some people don't just have XY or XX, some people, so is there a respectful way that you can respond to that, maybe including it in that presentation?
Yes, although it would probably come up mostly as a question that comes afterward. It is absolutely true that there are exceptions. There are. We cannot deny that. For example, are there some people that have a Y chromosome that does not have the SRY genes, or that the SRY genes are defective? And the answer is yes, there are. Now, the percentage of that, or the incidence of that, is under 1%. I mean, it's very, very low. And so what would be the effect of that? Well, the effect of that would be that the individual would develop as a female. And they would be legitimate females because they don't have that gene. And it's just basically the way that they would develop. And there's also a range of difficulties that occur along the way during development, just like we have with every other genetic kind of like contribution to who we are. There are some ranges of defects that occur along the way. Some of them are developmental, congenital, occur during development. So you may want to say that when he says we do have exceptions to this particular thing that happens, that they happen along the way, and we have to recognize it. I'm going to accompany the individual as you would accompany anyone that has a condition that is just not the quote unquote, I don't want to say the normal, because you don't want to call a person abnormal, but kind of like the average, decision. We do know, very well established, that basically we develop into male or females, and the presence of that SRY gene occurs in that way. So, okay. So you gently kind of like say that, and we accompany them, and we walk with them. We don't necessarily just go with them and just say, well, you're going to be this way because I know better. No, you just walk with them. And okay, I have Molly Kay raising her hand.
I just had a quick question about that. I'm not sure if you added in the percentages of when those genetic, I don't even know if they call them mutations anymore, whatever the genetic differences of the smaller than the 1%. Do you guys add those percentages in to give them sort of depth of understanding about how often that actually occurs. Obviously, they're human beings. They're not they're not percentages. So I don't know if you, like, as a group, want to stay away from that. But I also feel like, just the educator side of me, it's important for them to really have that understanding of the depth of, like, how, you know, the actual chances of those things happening to a person, and then accompanying them on that. I don't know if you add those in or not.
Well, we might say that if they ask it directly, we might just say then that the incidence of is so minimal that we just understand this, that the logical biological research and data is so obvious that you have a good SRY gene and you'll have a male develop, as long as everything else works throughout too, right? And so, of course, and they're going to ask questions that are challenging and that we must accompany, quote unquote, in a way that doesn't assume that we know the perfect answer to that. We just accompany them and say, you know, those are difficulties that we have to walk with. But we don't necessarily also, at the same time, on a whim, decide to say, okay, because now you're 11 years old and you're a little bit confused about your identity, that we're going to just kind of like assume that you really are the opposite gender of what you're showing biologically. You know, we don't necessarily say that to the kids in front of it. We would say, this is what we assume. So once we have this information, this is kind of like what we work as our base to understand our sexuality, right? Biologically speaking, of course. But then slowly, as you will see, as the units develop, these will actually address questions that have to do more with the essence of the human being, which now goes to a more theological and even philosophical realm.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
This is, so first of all, when my classes are both boys and girls, but of course for these units they're separate. But when I have like 15 or 20 guys, 8th graders, I have found it very helpful. First of all, if I can find one of my colleague males to help teach the class. And if I can't, usually I can, but if I can't, then what I'll do is, in my situation, I'm a medical professional, so I do wear my white coat. And I find for 8th graders who are very energetic, that for the males, for the help them with the diagram and just to get the idea of what does what, I have sort of like a, I guess you might say a skit, where we have, if you can imagine, they pull aside the chairs, they put like a little blanket on over 2 of their desks. Some of the guys are hiding underneath, some guys are on top, and then we have like streamers that represents the vas deferens. We have the bladder as a big yellow balloon. We have the prostate with a milk jug. We have the seminal vesicles with fructose. So these kids are running up, getting their tails, getting some fructose, eating it, running down their urethra where they're being bombarded by cholesterol so that they don't burn the walls of the urethra. It's very, very action-packed, and they learn the terms and they remember it this way. So it's just,
You have to write that down so that we could actually
sometime I'll do the diagram, I'll send it, because it's really, really, you can imagine the kids really getting to throwing these cholesterol things at each other. It's really fun. And it's a very easy way to teach the different parts. And for the girls, I have them do pairs where they have, you know, they're sitting at their desk and they have a pair and they have the little, they get the idea of the size of the different parts too, you know, the little spaghetti and the ovaries and the sand. And then I have one that's open up, and I can bring like one of those little tiny fetuses so they get the idea. And I have like a red kind of plastic balloon that strips off, you know, for the endometrium. Anyway, it sounds kind of crazy, but it's an easy way to teach the different parts that kids can remember easily, I think.
Right.
Thank you.
One of the things that we are going to miss in this course is the ability to do some of those skits, which are a lot of fun for the instructors that are preparing to teach this to do, so that they can then also put it a little bit, have a better idea of what it would look like in the classroom. unfortunately, in this virtual world, it's very difficult to have that done. So one of these days, what we'll have to try to find a way is to videotape one of these and put it together. We just never had done it in one of our workshops before. But there are a couple of videos that we have, but they're in Spanish. So that might be a difficulty for some of you. Okay, so what I'd like to do is to very quickly give you a little bit of this background. Let me make sure we get to the right spot. There we go. Okay. So we're going to be giving you PowerPoints that serve two purposes. One of them is, as you have seen some of them, the purpose of these PowerPoints is to make sure that you have some graphics. You don't have to show every slide of every PowerPoint to the students, but you can pick out good ones, or at least see what these have, and if you can find even a better one, because there are some that are better, and one of the problems that we have is copyright. So stealing, for example, a good diagram of the reproductive system from some of the major publishers is not legal, and so using them for ourselves is not is something that we can't do. So we have to come up with our own diagrams or those that are just common use that don't have any copyright. And so these serve that purpose, to be able to pick out diagrams and slides that you can show your kids when needed, but also it replaces a little bit having to put together lots and lots of documents for you to read. And so much of the information is in the PowerPoint. In other words, just by looking at the PowerPoint, you can get quite a bit of information that saves you from having to go and read textbooks, for example. And so these are the two main purposes of these slides. And so because one of the things you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a little bit of a background. Questions are going to come up, and some of you that are doctors would know this, or that are biologists would know this. But some of you that are not, if you basically studied philosophy or just theology, and you never looked at or were that interested in biology, it's not going to be easy for you to remember these parts and know how they function. So we want to provide the resources for you along the way. So having said that, a couple of things about the history of the male anatomy. In 1677, these two researchers or biologists, they're actually naturalists at the time, they were able to first observe the human sperm, and they thought that they were looking at a miniaturized human being. So you can see the picture of a sperm with the body of a person and the head. And of course, they really thought that this was what allowed a human being to develop, in a sense, giving the male, particularly, the determination of whether you're going to have a human being. Of course, this is obviously not understood this way today, but this was known as the preformist theory. That means that the human being was preformed, and then it was just this seed was put into the egg of the woman, and the egg of the woman would actually serve as the incubator for the human being. By 1830, Prevost and Dumas proved that sperm were needed for fertilization, and by 1956, we know Watson and Crick were the ones that figured out the DNA molecule and the number of chromosomes and genetic material of human species. The male reproductive system is made up of many, many parts, as you can see, and this is, of course, if you looked at the sex differentiation video, and if you haven't, there's also the PowerPoint that accompanies that I'll make available to you. you will notice that it is a process of getting to what we're looking at now as an adult. And so the testes are located in the scrotum, a sac of skin that surrounds the testes. The testes have to descend from the abdomen to the scrotum in order to be literally outside of the abdominal cavity. And I guess most of you know why, right? What is the reason why the testes have to descend into a sac, a scrotum, that is outside of the, anyone?
Is it temperature control?
Correct. And it turns out that sperm will not develop very well at normal body temperature, that they require a temperature that is a couple of degrees to up to 3 degrees below body temperature. And so there are muscles surrounding the scrotum and also connecting it to the pelvic cavity that allow the testes to come nearer. So they're drawn in by these muscles when the temperature is too low, or to relax and let the scrotum basically extend itself further away from the abdomen when the temperature is too high. All right, and so this is something that you can tell the students, especially the boys, but then later the girls as well, that, for example, wearing tight clothing in the summer can actually affect your fertility. And so we do know today that on average, only somewhere under 50% of the sperm that we produce as males is actually viable sperm, fertile sperm that are capable of fertilizing an egg, healthy sperm. More than 50%, because of the temperature, because of toxic conditions, because of a number of factors, are just non-viable. Okay. All right, so the testes on the inside are going to contain lots and lots of little tubules that are, very, very high numbers of these, producing millions of sperm each day. The sperm will lead through those tubules and eventually come to this structure that surrounds the testes called the epididymis, as you can see here. The epididymis is the place where the sperm will mature and gain their ability to swim. And then from there, they will pass through the vas deferens, which is, or ductus deferens, you can call it either way, which is a tube that carries the sperm through the front of the pelvis and over the bladder, but slightly lateral. Remember, there's going to be 2 of these, 1 for each testes. And then the 2 tubes will merge at the back of the bladder and form a little like open little blister-like ampulla, where they are then flanked by 2 little vesicles known as the seminal vesicles that join a single tube. And these seminal vesicles produce a lot of the seminal fluid. About 60% of the seminal fluid that accompanies the sperm is going to be produced in the seminal vesicles. Everything then joins into one little duct called the ejaculatory duct, which merges with the same tube that comes from the bladder, known as the urethra. But it does this inside a structure that is unique to males, known as the prostate. The prostate gland is a gland that is a little bit smaller than a golf ball, but can actually enlarge in some cases, especially in older men, to the size of a softball in some cases. Can become enlarged benignly, that means without any kind of cancerous situation, but it can also sometimes also be enlarged or not enlarged, but be cancerous. Prostate cancer is one of the highest incident cancer in males. And then the urethra will then enter what will be the tissues that are erectile tissues that permit an erection to take place in the male. There's going to be a 40% of the seminal fluid produced by the prostate, so 60% from the seminal vesicle, another 40% or so by the prostate, and then maybe within a smaller range, you're going to get a lot of fluid from the bulbourethral glands, sometimes known as Cowper's glands, and they provide a lubricating fluid that usually is released pre-ejaculation of the male. Okay. The urethra is surrounded by a particular kind of erectile tissue known as the corpus spongiosum, the spongy body. It's literally a little porous tissue that gets filled with blood, but remains quite soft surrounding the urethra. And so that spongy body, or corpus spongiosum, extends all the way to the front of the penis and forms the glans. So notice the glans penis is the tip here, and it has this very soft spongy tissue, and it surrounds the urethra that opens at the very tip of the penis. Above the corpus spongiosum, you have these two rod-like structures, one shown here, known as the corpus cavernosa. And these two are the ones that are most responsible for the erection of the male. And so these two have larger spaces for more blood to be engorged, and plus all of these little connective tissue structures that get quite stiff during an erection. Okay. All right. So the testes are the ones that are responsible for the formation of sperm. They're ovoid organs, about 2 by 3 by 4 centimeters. That's roughly about 1 and to about maybe close to 2 inches in length and width. In an adult, both weigh about 40 grams. This is very little. And again, situated outside of the abdomen within the scrotum. They are surrounded by a thick connective tissue known as the tunica albuginea, and they're very, very sensitive. They have lots of nerve endings that are connected to them. So this is where, for example, any kind of blow to the testes can be very, very painful. This is something that the boys are going to always be asking, you know. They're divided by little septa on the inside. Little septa are little walls, and each has about these seminiferous tubules that are several dozen of these. They're about 50 centimeters in length, about 250 micrometers. That's about 1/4 of a millimeter in diameter. And there's a place where the production of sperm occurs. Now, these tubules are immersed in this space where other cells known as Leydig cells are going to be present there. Leydig cells are the ones that produce testosterone. Okay? So the function of the testes is to produce sperm. We call that spermatogenesis, which is a little bit, I think, of some of the aspects of what Liz was speaking about in her skit, not the only ones. And to produce testosterone, which has an endocrine function, that's a hormonal function, both for the production of male secondary sex characteristics, so all of those characteristics you associate with a male, but also the testosterone will actually aid the process of the maturation and formation of sperm. So here you can see a little bit of what the testes on the inside look like. So these little divisions there, little compartments, those are the septa or walls that divide each one. So this is one seminiferous tubule. This is another one. This is another one. This is another one. And they all will merge into tubules that eventually lead to the epididymis. And from there, this is where the sperm will mature, and eventually they lead to the vas deferens. Okay. Questions? Okay, let's take a quick look at the female. And, so,
Sorry, can I ask a quick question?
of course.
I'm just, this might be too much to get into with the timeline today, but I just wondered in general, if you were teaching a group of grade 8s, for example, how much detail do you go into with all that? Like, as far as how much do you provide right off the bat? And then second question would be, how much more do they ask for?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you actually get into all those different details.
Yes. Well, we do according to the questions. We just go through the handouts. That's our first and kind of like our departing point, right? The handouts to fill out, and they fill out the names, and then we go over a little bit of the functions of each. And then questions may arise, such as, for example, why are the testes outside of the body? Questions may arise about, what are some of the things that are healthy or not? I see that my diagram here in the front that I'm showing you is all completely off with the lines. When I transferred this to a Google Doc, it just it became unaligned. But sorry, I got distracted with trying to answer the question. But that's basically what we do. Any suggestions, Molly and Sally and Liz, to answer Elizabeth's question?
Yeah, I just want to agree with you, Deacon Santi, that once you show the diagrams and you start talking about the function of each, I really rarely get questions because they're receiving a lot of information. And so it's pretty basic. I think that I would, as I've gone through more trainings, I would like to use some more of these diagrams, but don't feel overwhelmed by it. You will just slowly get there. And again, my experience is they don't ask many more questions. I really like the idea that Liz had in making it more of an interactive activity. But it is so important. I have had, certain questions from the girls, like, is it the same tube, through the penis, is there a separate tube for when they urinate? And, simple questions like that. And so that's where these are so good for us to know and to be able to answer those simple questions. But I don't get very many questions after the basic diagrams.
Nor do I, but the questions that you will get are very hard to predict. And so as a teacher, what I've learned is having this, like really studying this background material helps me feel more comfortable when I'm in the classroom with them, because their questions will be so unpredictable. Feeling better prepared helps me as I'm presenting not be as nervous. That said, when they ask a question and you don't know the answer, they don't get upset that you don't know the answer if you're honest with them and say, that's a really good question. I'll answer it next week, or let's look it up right now. However you are able in the classroom to address that question, or not, and just wait. I think the students, they really trust you when you say you don't know something, because you're reminding them that this is important, big information, and we're all in it on the journey together of learning this kind of thing. But perhaps that's, if Liz is right, like she is an expert on this kind of thing, so she would have a different experience. But for those of you who are more like me, in that this is not information that you are an expert, it's okay to be to be open with your students about that.
And can I just say, Molly, that I make it very clear to the class that I'm part of an international team. And if I don't have the answer, I have other colleagues that we can ask. And so they know it's not just me that's teaching these, that we have a whole team of people behind us that can help the students. So if I don't know the answer, I'm going to go to one of my colleagues, part of Teen Start International, that can help us with the answer.
Yeah, fantastic.
What's the timeline for getting through this material? This is meant to be done in one session, both the male and the female, and is that typically, does it work out despite all the questions and everything?
That'll depend on your situation and how you structure your units for the classes that you've mapped out. Honestly, the classes go by so fast, especially when you only have an hour, that while they do want to ask questions, you honestly won't have the time. You'll be getting through all this information so quickly that it's really quite enough they're not just sitting around like wondering what's happening. They're being given so much so quickly.
Right.
So it just depends on your situation.
And I have an hour and a half to teach. And I do get through this in that, but I don't think I could do it with less than an hour and a half.
So for my 8th grade, and my classes are only 50 minutes, 50 minutes because of the way the school runs. And it takes me 2 classes for each. So I'll have 2 classes just with the girls, 2 classes just with the boys. So it does take at least 2 classes because you're giving so much information and because of the activities I have them do.
That's where it really is so important to map out the number of classes you can have. And I would like to do this better so that you can take the time to create these, the skits I think are a great idea, but I've never had time to do it because we haven't had enough classes. So I think what I have experienced in the last few years is the importance of just taking the time and letting the kids discover and not rushing through a lot of this information. It's so important to just take the time and sit with it and let the kids digest it, because this is a lot of information. It's a lot of information for us.
Yeah. Now, and also you will notice as we go into Unit 4 that you will be reviewing the anatomy and physiology a little bit, or at least have a chance to if you want to. Obviously, you can decide depending on how well they seem to have absorbed the information. But one of the first objective of Unit 4 is going to be to review the anatomy and physiology a little bit, even if it is 5 minutes. Do you all understand this? Do you remember this? Is it okay? Do you have any questions? So that it allows you a little bit of a flexibility so that if you don't finish it in one session, you can address it in the next one.
Something that's important to remember, or that in the circumstances in which I have taught, what I always remind myself is that it's not my goal as a Teen Star instructor that the kids memorize all of these words and 3 years down the road, they remember exactly the definition of the vas deferens. My goal is so that when they are exposed to this information in a biology class in college, or their friends are talking about it in high school or something, that they've learned about it with the proper reverence and the proper comfort, and they see it through a beautiful lens, that when they're exposed to it, perhaps in a way that goes against human dignity, they have that foundation of, no, I'm familiar with these things, even if I don't necessarily remember, and I know that it's good, I know that it's beautiful, and I know the basic things that are true. And so whatever they'll be exposed to then for the rest of their life, or the conversations they have about these kind of topics, they'll be able to approach them in a much different way, if that makes sense.
All right.
I didn't remember what half of these things were, and I learned them at one point. So that's much to your point. In fact, I was getting a little nervous because I thought the vulva was in the left thigh for a while until I moved those things over again. I thought, wow, I'm really bad.
No, that's all good. That's all good.
Okay, so when looking at the female, we just quickly obviously go through this, and the vulva is going to be a very important aspect that you want to make sure you're clear. This is the external part of the female anatomy, because that's where they're going to eventually, the girls particularly, are going to make their observations as we teach them to chart their fertility. And so we don't have any kind of internal observations, so we don't suggest them ever. It's only what they might feel, and I'll let Molly and Sally and Liz actually be the ones when we get to the understanding of the fertility of the female, how to teach them to make these observations. The obvious organ of reproduction, the one that produces the eggs, the ova, are the ovaries. As you can see here, there's 2 ovaries. They remain in the abdominal cavity because there is, in the case of the female, no problems with developing these eggs with body temperature. And so they don't need to change their body temperature for the best development. They are connected to the abdominal cavity by the ovarian ligaments and other ligaments that are not shown here. And they're flanked by these tubes. They're known as the fallopian tubes, or sometimes the oviducts, and even in some cases the uterine tubes. They're the same thing. Okay. I try to mention this to my anatomy class that I teach, that anatomists and physiologists have been trying to move away from naming parts of the body or cells or anything like that after those that discovered them or studied them, and just name them more according to the location and their shape and structure. So that's why oviduct and uterine tubes are more used now. But fallopian was the one that actually discovered the fallopian tube. Okay. All right. And the fallopian tubes have little finger-like projections called fimbria that sway and move and draw the egg that might be released from a follicle into the fallopian tube, and it will be fertilized in this kind of wider portion of the fallopian tube within about 24 hours or less after ovulation, if it's going to be fertilized, of course. And if it is fertilized, then it navigates through the fallopian tube, and it takes about a week, and then it becomes implanted in the endometrium. That's the lining of the uterus. The uterus is this structure here. The uterus has a kind of like a higher superior upper part called the fundus, but the uterus is lined with a layer of tissue that grows every menstrual cycle, preparing for the implantation of a fertilized, not a fertilized egg. By then it's an embryo, actually, for the implantation of an embryo. It takes about a week before it implants, and along the way, the fertilized egg develops and divides and divides and divides until it becomes a little embryo and implants itself in the endometrium. At the lower, at the base of the uterus, you have the neck of the uterus, or cervix. And the cervix has little crypts, and these crypts are specialized in producing mucus. And depending on the time of the menstrual cycle, some of the mucus will plug the cervix and render a woman incapable of really fertilizing an egg. And then in other parts of the cycle, when she is fertile, she will produce cervical mucus that may flow to the vulva. And so that cervical mucus can be felt, and the change in the sensation is very easily recognized, so that she can actually determine whether she's feeling or sensing the mucus, and she may even see it when she goes to the bathroom and just practices normal hygienic practices, of course. The uterus has a myometrium, which means a muscular wall that can expand, obviously, many times its actual size once she's pregnant and the baby grows. And it is important to note that this cervical mucus is just as important for fertility as the egg and the sperm are. It's just as simple. Without the cervical mucus, it's practically impossible for fertilization to occur. Okay. Here's a side view of the female reproductive systems, but you can also recognize the differences between the digestive tract, the reproductive, and the urinary. And unlike the male, the urinary tract is separate from the reproductive tract. Here you can see the vulva, and these are the folds. There's a labia majora, and there's a labia minora, or sometimes called singular labia minus and labia majus. Again, these are a little off, unaligned. I'll fix those for you and make sure that you don't have that occur to you and yours. The ovary is a very important structure. So this is a close look at the ovary with follicles that are developing in different stages according to this diagram. So you will notice that there are these primordial follicles. A woman, as you will see later on today, is born with a limited number of follicles, and each follicle contains an egg. Okay, every cycle, a small number of these, somewhere around a dozen to 2 at the most, are recruited, and they begin to undergo these stages of going through their primary, then secondary. Eventually, one of them usually becomes the dominant follicle. Sometimes it's more than one when you get, for example, fraternal twins or triplets even, but almost always it's one that dominates and becomes the mature or Graafian follicle. Ovulation is the release of the egg that the follicle was helping to get to maturity. Once the egg is released, it will go into the fallopian tube, but what remains of the follicle becomes the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum is very important to prepare and help the endometrium, the lining of the uterus, to become very, very nice and ready to receive the implantation of an embryo. That corpus luteum will remain viable for about somewhere around 10 days after ovulation. And once, if there is no fertilization of the egg that was released, there's going to be a signal to it that there's no need for the corpus luteum to continue, and it regresses and eventually becomes scar tissue or a corpus albicans. Corpus luteum basically means yellow body. Corpus albicans means white body. Okay, now there's many more things to keep in mind. We're going to come back to these as we move into understanding male and female fertility. I think it is 11:14 my time. I know you can extrapolate to yours, but maybe this is a good time to take a few minutes of a break. We may have to do 2 little breaks today in order to get all of the information, but are there any further quick questions before we do? Yes, thank you. The lines on Canvas are correct. I know. This is, I prepared this one to simplify it for you because you're going to have more in your PowerPoints than what I'm showing you today, or that we'll show you. And so the PowerPoints that are on Canvas I took those and put them in a simplified, and when they transferred, the lines got misaligned. So I apologize for that.
Can I just say one quick thing?
Yes.
I don't want to sound schmoozy or whatever, but I just want to say that all of you are such good explainers, whether you're talking about anatomy and physiology or just how you teach your students or how you deal with parents. I'm just amazed at how good you are at just explaining it, and also how compassionate you are. Like when you were talking
thank
about
you.
how to deal with the difficult questions, I'm just amazed. I'm kind of wishing you could all just be sitting with me while I'm
No, you're
I think it must take a lot of practice to get to that point where you can be that secure in what you're teaching, that you can be that compassionate in how you answer. So anyway, just want to say thanks before we take a break.
Thank you very much. And we keep trying. It's a work in progress, right, Molly, Sally, and Liz?
For sure.
For sure.
Learn from our students too. We certainly learn from our students.
Yes.
Yes, that's exactly. That's very. I think that's a wonderful thing to keep in mind. That as you teach, you will get so much more from them than sometimes you think you're giving them.
And you can't act shocked when they come up with a term or a situation. You just have to, okay, just be very professional about it. But you can't act like, oh my gosh, you just have to be very professional about it.
Even though sometimes you do feel like saying, where'd you get this from?
By the way, the question box, I never said, when you get those questions, and you might get them in person as well, always answer them at the next class, as it gives you time to process and to figure out how to answer things properly.
So for me, the question box never worked. I would have one of the kids decorate the question box. But I think what happened is if you have a question box, then they're going to be saying, oh, who's going to put the question in? So the kids are looking at each other. So I found it better that they could email me if they wanted to, more sort of anonymously or whatever. It worked better than I'll still do the question box, but I never get a question in the question box.
Yeah,
I get lots of questions in class, not in the box.
Molly came up with a good idea on that, where if you have a smaller class that, or even a larger like that, I guess. So one child is not being singled out there. She suggested everybody put a piece of paper in the question box. Everybody's going to put a piece of paper in the question box, whether or not there's a question on it. So that's a way to get around that.
That's great, Molly. Thank you.
Yeah. There's a question I think Anna's asking about the slides. We are working on more scripts. The truth is that we're just not at that point of being able to produce the script for the presentation. So part of the recordings help to kind of like look at how to present this and make sure that you get pointers. Now we do have the plan of actually coming up with scripts. There is a sometimes you run the risk of actually becoming too robotic and scriptic, and then that you can't add your own. But it always helps to try to have that. So we'll work on making sure that. But the truth is that we don't have notes for every one of our slides at this point.
With guys in particular, I've noticed this when I've taught on pornography and stuff. You want to review those questions before you read them loud, because guys, you're going to get a lot of nonsense in there,
Absolutely.
Girls too.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
They'll just be funny sometimes too. They're not always like scary questions. Sometimes they're just like really unexpected. Like one of my students asked, why do they call it a sperm whale? And I was like, I don't know. I have to look that up. Just really random questions that are usually you're not sure if they're innocent in asking the question or they're trying to stump you or like what it is, but it's fun, right?
The girls will ask a lot of questions about their period, and I'll just be shocked that they don't know certain things. And these are 8th graders, And so don't ever assume that they might hear terms and slang and all of this, but there's a lot that they really are unaware of. Like how can I go swimming when I'm on my period? Things like that. They ask a lot of questions like that.
That's why class is so important in my pregnancy, the postpartum and prepartum Teen Star. I can't tell you how many times I've had single mothers impregnated because the guy said, I'm too old to get you pregnant. and they had no idea. In fact, I teach them their basic anatomy, which they do not know. So that's why this is important.
That's right. Okay, there's one more question and then we'll break because otherwise we will not finish today. But thank you. And please don't hesitate to put those questions in there. And we'll try to answer them even if we have to. Use the discussion boards in Canvas as well. But Nanette is asking about the sex differentiation. It's going to be up to you. I think you bring that out or you show even that video that I put together. If you kind of like run into this question about how come, for example, we have so many people that are just, you know, the question about hermaphrodites will come up a lot. You know, what about a hermaphrodite? And what's a hermaphrodite is a person that has both sexes, right? And the reality is that the truth is that there is no hermaphrodite in humans. Are there people that have possibly ambiguous organs? Yes. Are there some situations where there's a little bit confusion? That's true, but there's no in the human individual that I have ever found in all of the research that I've done, correct me if I'm wrong, the scientists here, that has been able to produce both sperm and egg. They might have been able to produce either egg or sperm or none. Right? And so anyway, so that question is going to come up, and that might be the point where you say, well, you see this information about how we're born with these genes, and then these genes can help us, and you can go over that SRY and Y chromosome, fact that I just showed. Okay. All right, let's take a little bit, an 8-minute break. Is that okay? Till 30 minutes after, and we'll come back, okay? I'm gonna pause. Somebody remind me to restart the PowerPoint. So we now begin our session, and we're gonna skip from this unit of the girls, and we're gonna skip over to the boys first and come back. Now you obviously would be teaching these separately, so it really doesn't matter which one you choose to start with. Of course, if you're teaching the boys, you would start here. Later on, we'll do Unit 4 for the girls. Okay. Molly and Sally, are you with us?
Yep.
All right. All right, if one of you can pick a couple of people to read the good and the challenge here. Anyone?
I will do it. Let's see. Jill, may you please read the good and the challenge?
So the good is our bodies tell us a story about ourselves, and the challenge is we have to learn how to understand what our bodies are trying to tell us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'll work on the boys, and then the ladies can actually lead you through the girls. But the first objective here is, as I mentioned earlier, here we have an opportunity after you've done the previous unit, which had to do with differences and the anatomy and the physiology, for mostly anatomy actually. We now can review this if you need to. And again, remember the manual is still a guide. It's not necessary that you actually have to do every single item or procedure exactly like the manual says. But you might want to always raise the question, okay, any questions about male and female anatomy that you still have, you might want to check to see if they actually took it home. So you can check the homework assignment. Did their parents do okay? And most of the kids really like to share that their parents struggled and that they had a lot of fun with it. So we may have some talking points such as, all right, the health of the reproductive systems. We have several things about the reproductive system that do indicate a lot about our health, and both in males and in females. And so a healthy reproductive system is one that kind of like gives us a pretty good clue that the rest of our bodies is doing pretty well, okay? And so that's something to keep in mind. Identity, again, from the idea of male and female complementarity, dignity, meaning of life, and knowing whose we are. Of course, that might lead you a little bit beyond the anatomy and physiology and lead you to conversation that is more philosophical or religious. Okay. Here, we go to objective 2. And please, if one of you can monitor any questions that may come up, or if you have any questions, please let us know. And while this is a little bit pretty straightforward with the language, and some of the kids will be a little bit surprised when you do this, it's a pretty good way to introduce this using terminology that is correct. All right, so students will be able to describe what is meant by the terms erection, sexual arousal, nocturnal emission, seminal fluid, and distinguish between the first two, the list of various causes of each, of the erection especially, distinguish which are specifically sexual in nature and how the last two terms are related to the first. So here we would again ask the group to give their opinion about working together as males alone, which this allows them, and this same question might actually come up with the females, in which you can actually speak about these things a little more freely. Again, remind them a little bit about the commitment, because there's going to be a tendency for giggling, there's going to be a tendency for embarrassment or of even undignified comments. And so reminding them a little bit about what they committed to as they made up the rules, as they signed up for Teen Star, might help to quelch a little bit the problems that might come up. Again, list these concepts on the board. Again, ask them what they know about, for example, hormones, then other signs that they may have actually seen that present themselves, including things like they may mention wet dreams and erections. So this is before you even write out any of these terms for them. Okay. You can divide it into small groups and have them complete handout 4-5, which if we go back down here, this is the handout, which you can do this as a handout, or you can do this by writing it up on the board. You can do it either way. You can give it as a handout and give them to small groups. It will depend a lot on whether you have a small group. If you're teaching, some of you were asking, what about if I teach my own children? You may have only 1 or 2. So it's going to be depending on that. And so then you can ask them to fill out whatever they know about this. The good news is we do have an answer key for you in case you need to supplement their their answers, I'm sorry. Okay. So let me scroll back up. All right. And then there's a misconceptions that may have, and so we can go down to handout 4-6, and here you can see this handout. So for example, giving them these kinds of phrases. And you can add to these. We have a few, and we have an answer key for you. So sperm and hormones such as testosterone are produced in the testes. Pain in the testes is normal during adolescence. Facial hair and hair in the legs must be present in all men. Growth during adolescence is uniform. Sperm takes 74 days to be produced. This one's tricky because they think that they're produced daily. No, it takes 74 days to fully be produced. The physical changes that occur in adolescence are related to hormones. Again, these are about temperature, and also testes must be emptied in order to avoid tumors. This is a misconception that is very common, that's one of the reasons why the nocturnal emissions occur. That's what they think, okay? All right. Any questions up to now? Okay. This is a good clarification that needs to be given at one point. If it comes up and the questions come up, and even if it does not come up, it's a good note. Erections do not have to be caused by sexual arousal, and that it is common for males during puberty and adolescence, as well as during adulthood, to experience early morning erections as testosterone levels spike during the early morning hours. Depending on when they went to sleep, particularly, it's gonna happen. The later they go to sleep, probably the later it happens in the morning. Help them recognize that these events are a sign of health in terms of male fertility. Actually, a morning erection for a male is a pretty good sign of health. Okay? It means that their hormones are literally following the normal pattern. Okay?
Deacon Santi, I do have a question.
Yes.
So I feel like this unit, especially this part, has the potential for inviting, the use of just normal slang, especially if you're teaching, 8th graders, 10th graders. How do you handle that? I mean, is just that something that you invite and you just kind of attribute it to these terms, or do you kind of set ground rules or expectations around what's acceptable and what's not? I'm thinking, for example, the erections that happen between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. They'll say, oh, somebody says, oh yeah, that's morning wood. How do you handle that sort of a thing?
Yeah, you try to not act too, harsh on them immediately. You work your way towards it, and you're going to say, okay, we would call that an erection, and there's a reason why we would make a difference, and you would want to ask them immediately. Try to, again, bring it back to them. So let me ask you, for example, do you think that is language that dignifies you? Right.
Right.
And so that allows them to begin to ponder about it, and immediately some of them may well say, well, it's not that much different. Erection to me doesn't seem to dignify me either. And you can say, okay, that's fine. Just want you to think about it.
Something that I ask or try to talk to them about is, I will say, most of these things, there's so many different slang terms, and we might not even know the real words. We might only know the slang terms. And then I ask, I wonder where slang words come from, and why is it sometimes less embarrassing to use a slang word than the real word? Or why do you think kids like to use slang terms? And they talk about how, oh, well, it could be less embarrassing, or you sound cooler, or you don't know the real word, or things like that. And it kind of helps them feel not embarrassed for knowing slang words, but also having that discussion of like, why do humans use the kind of language that we use? And what kind of language do we want to use in our class, right? Do we want to use slang words in our classroom? Or Do we want to learn the real words? Things like that. It's always a really good conversation. And we have a lot in the manual. We've been kind of going a little bit quicker through it, but in different sections, you'll notice in the different notes to instructor, we have a lot of notes about teaching students about slang words. We even have a whole discussion about using different things. I know we looked a little bit at the modesty and language section that we wrote, but you'll notice a lot of helpful tips as you peruse, especially these units in the manual. There's some good ideas for you.
I actually would talk about the rules of the class the very first day of class. We say that you may know slang words, but in this class we're going to teach you, the more correct medical scientific. So even from the very beginning, the tone is set for this is a class to teach you. Well, again, be respectful, but also that we will give you some more of the more scientific terms.
And even just keeping it as simple as the morning wood, because one of my girls brought that up. She'd heard it. She has older brothers. And you just kind of you can always respond by asking the question, okay, I don't know what that means. What do you think that means? And they might have to say what they think it means. And then you just think about the star, always have the star in the back of your mind. How do you think that relates to our humanity as a whole? What is that saying to us? What is it saying to us?
Right.
Is it negative or positive? If you just always have that in the back of your mind, you can draw it out so that they're not feeling shame, and they're understanding, they're thinking more critically about what they're hearing. And
this is why at the very beginning you remind them a little bit of where they are, and it's still going to come up. They're kids, so but it's never wrong to just kind of let them know, remember where we are and how respect is important, and for yourselves and for others, and so forth. So hopefully that answers your question.
It's
so just going back to what Jamie just, I can see when you separate the boys and the girls, this could get completely out of control. Because guys, I'm 45 years old and I still hear these words are still being used.
It is amazing. Yeah.
You have to get right, but there's such an importance to the guys hearing the proper terms for the girls, because I think there is like this. You do develop that respect.
Yeah.
But when it comes to getting the guys alone, you're gonna have a whole different dynamic there. And then do you handle that a little differently? The guy. In terms of like cutting it off at the knees to say, okay, look, we're not going to talk this way. I don't know. I could just see it getting a little more complicated when you have the guys alone.
Yeah.
Or just always, why do we want to refer? Why do we want to refer to ourselves in this way? Like, what does it do for us?
Right.
Just ask them that question.
Yeah, Molly Kay has a question, I think.
I just had a quick logistical question. For those of you who have taught in parishes or in not the school setting where there's only a female instructor, when you're going into these types of things, is it a preference to have a male in the room? Obviously it's a preference to have a male being able to teach this, but if those options are not available, what is sort of the guidelines around being able to enter into this? Because I'm just hearing, I can't imagine that young men would be this forthright with like I was teaching the class, but maybe they would, I don't know. So I just want to know what sort of the logistical challenges are, or how you handle those logistical challenges when there's not obviously the same sex being able to teach that course.
Well, and maybe Liz that has done this with.
Yeah, I wear my white coat so they know I'm a professional, that I examine thousands of males. So, but that's how I handle it.
I would say from my experience that actually they're much more respectful to the woman teaching, and they won't bring up these questions. But that's actually not necessarily a positive always. That's why you want a male teaching it, because they will be able to express it more, and then you can actually act on it. Whereas if they don't, they're still going to have something unresolved of not being able to say it. So So ideally, yes, you might actually have a male teach it, but if you don't, then maybe having a male with you might help a little bit. They can actually support you. In the same, it's rarely going to happen the opposite way. You know, you can see by counting the number of participants here that we're about 2 or 3 to 1 females to males. We need more male teachers. So anyway, okay. Okay, and then Trish has actually shared in the chat, but I think we need to kind of get moving because otherwise we won't get done today. If Molly and Sally can monitor the chat box and
Got it.
Thank you. Okay, and so then one of the things that we try to do is with the, and we do it, we work on it and we emphasize it and we continue to try to promote it, is the keeping track of emotions in boys. I know what most of you guys are going to say. How do I get a male boy to track emotions when everything in their surroundings is saying that boys don't do emotions? And so in this particular case, we emphasize a little bit of the tendency that boys have to try to problem solve. So here what we do is we introduce the concept of emotions, that there are 6 basic emotions: fear, disgust, surprise, happiness, sadness, and anger. Of course, there's disappointment, there's a lot of others that are kind of like offshoots of these. And so you might ask them to prepare a skit about expressing emotions. You could do that. You could also have them present the skit, or at least have them, if you don't have enough time, another way to do this is to just write the emotions on a little piece of paper and then a description, and then they take turns sharing them. And then you basically introduce them to the idea of charting their emotions. And we do have an emotions chart, handout 4.3. It's a very basic one that I can show you real quick here for the boys, because the girls are going to chart emotions on their mucus chart as well. And so they're going to have both charting of mucus and of emotions. For the boys, obviously, it's only emotions. And we suggest, for example, little emojis or other signs or symbols that can help them understand these different emotions. And they have the date, the day itself, and then the predominant emotion. Okay. And by keeping track. Now, why do we want them to do this, and how do we get them to do it? Because it's going to take you about 2 or 3 sessions for them to really work on it and get it about it. And it is, you make them think particularly about what they want to do with this. So they're going to immediately balk at it. And then you're going to say, well, do you not ever get angry, frustrated, stressed, anxious? Do you ever have fears? And so forth. And then you say, well, do you think that those could impact your academic performance, your sports performance, all right, your batting average, for example, or whether you're going to do well if you're an artist, if you're going to play better the instrument that you play, or the performance that you have to go through, if you're stressed, if you're angry, if you're frustrated, as opposed to if you can keep track of how you're doing, maybe they can realize that if I'm doing not so well and I have a big event coming up, I can then work a little bit on finding ways to relax a little bit and to get myself better, in a better place, in order to perform better. So that's a little bit of a quote unquote way of convincing them to do it. All right. they're going to ask you if you keep track of your emotions as well. And so you would say, obviously be honest, but hopefully you might want to try that. You might want to try having a little bit of a record of how you're doing your emotions, how well you've been handling your work, your family, your etc. And then that way, you know, they can actually see that this seems to make some sense. And it is really important. It's a basic aspect of how they can then begin to experience in themselves some of the truths that Teen Star is pointing to. And like Sally says, then work it into the star. Work it into how is their star. Okay? Any questions? Okay.
Something, just a quick point to echo a theme that Liz has been doing a really good job sharing with everyone that could be helpful for this, is just reminding the kids that Teen Star students all over the world are doing this. And when we were at our international meeting in Chile a couple of years ago, one of the women who teaches in Africa was talking about the impact that the emotion charting for the young boys and the impact that that's had on their entire tribe, right? And in their small community in this, you know, tiny country in Africa. And so just sharing things like that helps the kids feel more, like, help them recognize how important it is and how global it is. So that could be a fun way to help them feel more comfortable, just reminding them that students all over the world in so many different areas do this, and maybe reach out to other Teen Star teachers to get some examples that you can then share in your classroom.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, so yeah, some of you were asking about Inside Out, and we do reference a few of the scenes. I should mention that we do have a YouTube quote unquote channel. It's more of a place where we load up videos that might be useful for you. If you go to YouTube, you just type in Teen Star USA, 3 separate words, just like teen, capital T, lowercase EEN, and then star all capitalized, and then USA capitalized. And I'll show this to you in a little bit as well, because we have a video to show you from there after I'm done with the mail curriculum of this unit. So anyway, and these are helpful, and you can, you know, and in fact, if you subscribe to it, we don't have a lot of people, about something close to 50 something subscribers, but the more that subscribe to it, the more we can possibly do even things like live sessions eventually on it very easily. Okay.
Can I just make a comment that it's really important for the boys to be able to understand their emotions and to put a name to it? Actually, there's a part of the brain going from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, so you're actually thinking more about the emotion. So, and I tell the boys, like, what happens if you don't express your emotions? Do they come out any other way? And of course, they do come out in behavior. So this is a way of actually helping the boys to put a name to their emotion. And it's not being girlish or sissyish or anything. To have the emotion or to put a name to it is extremely important, though.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to. We have a very extensive PowerPoint on male fertility that you may use again throughout this unit, and it's up to you to kind of like prepare yourself a little bit more with some background, like what I'm going to present, but there's even more information on the PowerPoint that I'm going to show you. And some of it you may choose to not address with your group, depending on need, of course. But some things about fertility that are very helpful. So male fertility, as opposed to female fertility, begins at puberty around the 12 years of age, and it will continue for the rest of the life of the male. And so, barring any medical conditions or other factors, males are fertile about 77% of their lives. Okay, whereas later on you'll see that a female is actually fertile approximately 7 or 8% of their lives in comparison. And so a very big difference, okay? You don't need to go into details about the reproductive, about the endocrine system, I'm sorry, but it might help you to know a little bit more about it. And we're going to have a whole unit on hormones where the thalamus and hypothalamus and the pituitary gland and the pineal gland, the thyroid, the thymus, the parathyroids, adrenal glands, pancreas, the female uterus, of course, and the male, and the female ovaries, of course, and the male testes. Okay. So showing them something like this. We do have a whole session on trying to label these on a diagram. So we leave that for later, but you might make use of this as we move into that area later. And right now, it's important for them to know that a lot of what they're gonna experience as far as fertility will depend on this kind of like rhythmic cyclical pattern of hormones that are kind of like going up and down every day and seasonally as well, in order to kind of make them fertile or infertile. In the case of the male, pretty much fertile all the time. Here we have a lot of structures that we would want them to kind of know a little bit. The hypothalamus is this little portion of the brain that leads to the pituitary gland, or sometimes known as the hypophysis. And the pituitary gland has two parts, an anterior, this part in front, and a posterior behind. And rhythmically, every day, sometime in the middle of the night, the hypothalamus releases this hormone known as GnRH. GnRH will go to the pituitary gland, and it will produce the release of, and that's the pituitary hypophysis, of LH and FSH. LH is going to go to cells called Leydig cells, which will produce testosterone. And FSH is going to go to the seminiferous tubules and produce spermatogenesis. Okay, testosterone is going to come back and is going to tell the seminiferous tubules to kind of like get even better at producing sperm. We mentioned this already. So if you look at the seminiferous tubule and you make a cross section of one, this is just a cross section through a seminiferous tubule. And you can see lots of cells on the outside border that are kind of small. These are the nuclei, the DNA containing part of the cells that are on the outer parts of the seminiferous tubules. And what's going to happen is that on a daily basis, these are undergoing slight changes. They're dividing and becoming more and more and more like sperm. And that's what we call spermatogenesis. Spermatogenesis, genesis means to originate, to make, to produce, and sperm, to produce sperm. So it depends on that delicate hormonal rhythmic balance that occurs every day in the male. And so, as you will see, it takes about 74 days for one of these cells to divide into and eventually become a sperm cell, get to the epididymis, and become ready to be fertilized, to fertilize an egg. Okay. Some of the cells undergo changes and they have names. That's not terribly important for the boys or the girls to know. However, you might want to go through it if you find it useful. All right, so spermatogonia are the quote unquote stem cells that will, throughout the life of the male, continue to make available new cells that undergo changes into primary spermatocytes. Eventually they go through the stage of spermatids and eventually sperm. There are cells in the seminiferous tubules known as Sertoli cells, which are not going to produce the sperm. They're not sperm producing or sperm becoming cells. They're supporting cells. They're very important. And they are the ones that surround the spermatogonia or stem cells and receive FSH and then promote these cells to undergo the changes that they're supposed to undergo. Outside of the seminiferous tubule, right here, you have these other cells called Leydig cells. They're getting LH from the pituitary, and they're going to then produce testosterone. Testosterone then comes into the seminiferous tubules and helps these cells in the process of them becoming sperm cells. Here's if you go back for a second, if you take a small section like this area, oops, there, you can see this is the outer border of the seminiferous tubule, and everything in pink are these Sertoli cells. Those Sertoli cells are the ones that help all of these are the spermatogonia, the beginning sperm cells, and they will surround them. And they actually protect them as well. So these cells are really important, for example, for protecting the spermatogonia that eventually will undergo all of these changes and become sperm cells, protecting them from diseases, from viruses, bacteria, microorganisms that may come along. Sometimes they obviously get overwhelmed and they break apart, and when they do compromise the male's ability to produce healthy sperm, and also they compromise his ability to not be able, or to prevent the sperm and seminal fluid from carrying the disease to other and obviously passing it on. Don't worry too much about the different compartments, but this is outside, and so these would be the Leydig cells here that produce testosterone. So these are the Sertoli cells in pink. Notice how they surround the other cells that then will become the sperm. So they produce what is known as the blood-testis barrier. You may have heard of the blood-brain barrier, which occurs in the head, that allows the brain to be it's going to be very difficult for disease-producing microorganisms from getting into the brain because of these specialized cells that protect the blood vessels in the brain. It's not fail-proof, as we know, but this occurs in the testes as well. So spermatogenesis is the process of producing sperm cells and begins during the embryonic stage when the primordial germ cells develop into gonocytes. By the 3rd week of gestation, then mitosis of these cells will give origin to the spermatogonia, and these are going to be present in the prepubertal tubules. These are the seminiferous tubules before puberty. Then after puberty, the spermatogonia will divide by a process known as meiosis, or meiosis for some of you, that gives origin to 4 sperm cells per single spermatogonia. Here you can see if you have most of the cells of our body have 46 chromosomes, and they divide by mitosis, right? And when they divide into 2 cells, and they're identical to the cell that they came from. Is meiosis is only going to occur in testes or in ovaries, but in the male, the testes particularly, the cells will then divide by a first division of meiosis, which leads to the reduction of the number of chromosomes. Okay, and then these will then divide each into 2 more. So the end result is 4 sperm cells, each having only 1 set of chromosomes compared to this cell that had 2 sets of chromosomes. Well, the egg is going to undergo a very similar process, and so when a sperm fertilizes an egg, it reestablishes the 46 or 23 pairs. It takes 74 days from the moment that the spermatogonia begin to divide until they develop into mature sperm cells. Although on a single day, there's so many of these at different stages of these 74 days that on every single day, a male will have millions of mature sperm cells. The production of sperm begins during puberty and again ends at the time of death. Of course, it declines with age, and the fertility of an older male will actually be reduced compared to that of a younger male. Again, this is susceptible to changes in temperature. These must remain at 2 to 3 degrees Celsius below body temperature. When you're looking at sperm, they have a little, quote unquote, a little hat that actually has, is known as an acrosome. It has lots of enzymes that will help the sperm in the process of eventually getting to the egg and go through the tissues that protect the egg, and eventually releasing these enzymes clears up the path for them in order for them to be able to fertilize the egg. Here you can see a smear of sperm. You can see the head of the sperm with its acrosome and the flagellum or tail. The tail does not begin to get mobile until it's in the epididymis, and there it gains motility. There's lots of factors, and this is a good thing to bring up with the boys, that influence spermatogenesis. We already mentioned temperature, circulation, and you will see that there's, for example, there's lots of times where the testes of the male kind of like rotates in the scrotum, and it causes this testicular torsion. Or there's also varicoceles, which are gonna make it so that it's very difficult for circulation to occur in the scrotum and testes, and this may alter fertility. Nutritional factors, oligoelements, which are elements that we need in small amounts, but we need them, magnesium, zinc, vitamins E, A, and C, many amino acids, all right, especially during prepubertal development as you reach that level. We know that radiation may produce aplasia. That means the cells stop dividing. Hormones. Gonadotropins are hormones like FSH and LH, and they help obviously in spermatogenesis. Also, contamination. So contamination, many different little chemicals, the food that we eat, things that we're exposed to, whichever environment we're at, can also alter spermatogenesis. Some toxic factors: alcohol, cocaine, marijuana, cigarettes, drugs, pesticides, toxins. Good timing to bring this up, how much this might affect their fertility. It's a good thing because obviously they're getting bombarded by friends that are probably offering them a lot of these. So different disorders.
Deacon Santi, just you might want to answer Geraldine's question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it because I'm so focused on.
Or to clarify, she says, does it take both meiosis and mitosis to produce mature spermatoza?
Yes. Yes. So during the process of division, there's a mitotic division first and then a meiotic division. We just want to make sure we don't overcomplicate. So, okay. These are all conditions that you might want to become familiar with. I don't want to necessarily go through every one of them, but there might be something that you may want to let them know. Some of the kids will come up with things especially if they're comfortable with you as a male teacher, but even with a female teacher, they'll say, what happens when I have testicular pain? What could cause it? And many of these can cause testicular pain. Testicular torsion, for example, epididymitis, the inflammation of the epididymis, can actually be something that causes pain. Checking for testicular tumors can actually be a good practice, just like we would teach a woman, a girl, to check for breast lumps.
Just a little reminder though, for those of you who are not medical professionals, to be careful with how you present that information, or even if you present that information, because if a student is speaking from experience, you don't want to sound like you're diagnosing what they're experiencing. So just a little word of caution to, especially if they're speaking from their own experience, to just suggest that they go to their doctor, and even to ask them if it would be okay if you in private, ask them if you could also reach out to their parents to, encourage their parents to also take them to the doctor as well.
Yeah, I would definitely make sure we are not training you to become physicians or to make diagnosis of problems. That would be very, very awful of our part to imply that. So obviously you can make sure that you do refer them if needed, to just let them know, talk to your parents and go to the doctor if you're having this problem or this, I cannot tell you what you have. If you have anything wrong, it might just be something natural that occurred at this point in you, and just make sure you always refer to a physician. So
yeah, you don't want to scare them too.
Right. So, okay, I know there's a few questions. Did we clarify them?
Yep, we've been taking care of them.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So, I mean, there's a lot more, and you will see it in those PowerPoints. There's a very good actual little kind of like step-by-step noticing different issues that could happen that might allow us not to diagnose them. For example, to know, do we have low testosterone, for example? And is it maybe a good thing to double check on it? So for males, there's like a little questionnaire of a few of 10 questions. And if you get 2 or 3 more, 2 or 3 or 4, I think it is, of them that you answer, yes, I have this, that might be a good indication to have your testosterone checked. Okay. All right, so we will now move on to the female and the unit 4. So I'm gonna present let make sure I get the right. There we go. So we're going to scroll back up. And as you already can see some of these charts and get to my special signs. I might want to just add one last thing. In our YouTube channel, there is a example of the Teen Stars Spain, and they do a very elaborate skit on spermatogenesis. You may want to take a look at it, even if you don't understand what they're saying. There is actually a way you can ask YouTube to put subtitles, but even if you don't understand, it gives you an idea of how you could make this a little more interactive as opposed to so academic if you're going to explore the idea of spermatogenesis, okay? All right, Sally and Molly. Molly, I think.
I just have one quick question for Liz. I was curious how if she teaches on this.
On my special signs?
On the spermatogenesis.
I use the Miracle of Life. I think it's for 8th grade. The part of the male reproductive is very good for them. It's not too much. So I use the Miracle of Life.
Okay.
Which we will also have available when we talk about beginning of life as a separate unit altogether, but it doesn't mean that you cannot use it in both places.
And so Sally, do you want to kick us off with this unit and then I'll pop in when you'd like, or do you want me to take a stab at the beginning here?
Oh, go ahead, Molly. You have a lot more experience teaching this than I do.
I don't know about that. Please chime in.
Okay.
So the good and challenge is the same as what we had read for the boys as well. And the first objective is the same. We've already reviewed it, right? Reviewing the anatomy and physiology and their conversations they had with their parents. The second objective is beginning to teach the girls about how to chart. And the most important thing to remember when you're just beginning to start is the importance of not giving the girls too much of an idea about what exactly it is that they're looking for or how they will be looking for things, because you want this to be this is the most important time of self-discovery for them. The more you share with them, the more that for those of you who have charted yourself, if you can put yourself back in the beginning when you were first learning, I remember for me, I was really confused. I had no idea what I was looking for, and I wanted to make sure I was doing it correctly. And while, of course, we want to teach the girls how to chart correctly and how to make their observations correctly, we don't want this to be something that they feel pressure for or that they need to fit inside a particular box of, oh, I'm looking for this particular kind of thing, especially because they're so young. Many of them won't even have started to have their cycles yet, especially when you teach middle schoolers. And so just being very gentle about this, about beginning to teach them how to chart. So the first thing I would say is when you're teaching early on, to talk to them about the fact that some of them will have started their cycles and some of them will not have, and that's perfectly okay. And that even the girls who haven't started their cycles can still chart, because they'll begin to notice things that will then help them predict when they're going to get their first period. I've had 2 or 3 students who've actually started their period in the midst of our Teen Star class. And it was a really incredible experience for them and for the other girls in the class. And just so beautiful, right? That those girls really do have a chart from the very, very beginning. So something to celebrate for sure. Okay, so learning to record and also the chart that we give the girls, it also includes their emotion charting. And that's something that every girl can always answer, right? Even if they don't observe anything, right? They're dry every single day, which dry is an observation. So they are making an observation. But they have something that changes, right, when they write about their emotions. And a lot of times, those girls who are more hesitant about charting their physical signs, they all love to chart their emotions. And it's a helpful way to get them comfortable with the concept of writing down on a chart every single day.
And to
And so this is,
piggyback off of what Molly's saying, sorry, Molly, I
no,
just want to tell you my experience with my girls this year. They begin to really start talking about their charting, and the girls that have not started their period, they turn to those girls and they say, "Oh my gosh, you guys are so lucky that you are going to know exactly when your period starts. If I had only known then," and then they start sharing their first period stories and how awful it was and this, that, and the other. So it makes for, there's some really great discussions when they start to learn to really express all of this. It's become so beautiful.
yeah. So in the procedure, we have a couple ideas for how you can begin the conversation with them. One of them is a quote from one of the Teen Star beginning teachers, right, who really helped create the program. When God gives a girl a sign, she has a right to know what it means. And so you can just ask the girl, what do you think that quote means? And what does it have to do with what we're about to talk about? And then we have a video that you can show. And you can choose how to show the video. It's broken down into two parts, where the first is a conversation about charting, really focusing on especially like the nervousness girls might be feeling about charting and why it's important to chart. And then the second half of the video is more in-depth look at the biology and anatomy and physiology of the female body and how the fertility cycle and the way the fertility cycle goes.
Do you want me to show that video right now, or?
Well, we don't have much time left, so I'm wondering if maybe we should skip that and have people watch it this week.
Sounds good. Yeah.
It also spares me the embarrassment of watching it because I'm in the video and it's not my favorite thing to watch.
If you notice over here, there's a Molly and a Lisa, and guess who they are?
Me and my mom. Okay, so and then some things you can do is you can pull out some terms you'll see from the video if you want to talk about that. But really the most important thing, if you don't mind scrolling down, Deacon Santi, just that discussion about learning how to chart. So you can give them the chart, right? The handout that has the chart, and give that to them and explain the different parts of the chart. This is where you write the day. This is where you write what you observe. And just to give you some practical tips about how to talk about this, what I'll say to the girls is the things and the video does a good job talking about this, but the things that you're looking for, right, will help you know where you are in your cycle. So what are some things that we might observe that helps us know where we are in our cycle? And they know blood, right? Oh, if I see blood, that helps us know that we're in a particular phase of our cycle. And I'll say, yep. The other thing that we might observe is some wetness. Sometimes women feel dry and sometimes women feel wet. And I don't go into much more detail than that, because all you're trying to do in the beginning, and sometimes all you'll do at all with your classes, is get them to observe wetness and dryness. We're not measuring things. We're not observing color unless they decide to do that, unless that's something that they notice and then begin to chart, because this is why Teen Star takes months and months and months. They can't learn this all at once, and you don't want to tell them, oh, you might see something that's sticky, because they don't know what sticky is, or you might see things that's white or that's clear. They don't know what's white. They don't know what's clear until they begin to see things over time, and they say, hey, I think that was white. Oh no, now I know that was clear. Oh, I think maybe that's what they're talking about by sticky or tacky or dry or whatever it is, right? Because as those of you who chart will remember, you don't really know what's dry until you know what's wet, and you don't know what's wet until you know what's dry. And so you really have to live it. And don't worry, we do have more resources to give to the students over time that helps narrow their focus and gives them more information about exactly what it is they're looking for. So again, you give them the simple chart, introduce the concept of wetness and dryness, and say you might not know, but at the end of the day, we talk about when you make the observations and how. Really, really emphasize the fact that they don't need to do anything different throughout the day other than their normal daily hygiene habits. They don't need to do anything different. They don't need to touch themselves or look at anything in a different way. Just as you go about your day, as you go about your normal hygiene routines, if you notice wetness or you notice dryness or you notice blood, that's what you want to pay attention to. Does anybody have any questions so far?
No questions in the chat.
No questions. No questions in the chat. Okay, so let's see. There is a handout. There's some handouts that we'll look at that you aren't necessarily going to give to the students at this point in the class, but they're helpful to have in this part of the manual so you know where they are and can use them in the way that you see fit with your classes. So here is the cycle learning chart. We have a couple different versions of it. Sorry, it's upside down.
Oh.
And so you just go over it with them. This is, what does sensation mean? Sensation is where you write either W for wet, D for dry, or B for blood. Something else that I do with the students is I don't have them color with the red or green or white until in class. And so I have them write throughout the week or the 2 weeks. And then in class, I'll have them pull out their charts. And then that's when I'll have them color and I can walk around the class and just kind of take a look at what they're doing. And so you don't want to tell them the patterns they're looking for because they'll try to fit their observations into a pattern. You want them to notice a pattern based on their observations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's a quick question that I think we should address in the chat. Can we offer the girls charting help if we are an accredited NFP instructor? At one point, Teen Star used to include Billings charting help. That no longer is that no longer acceptable, or is it something that can still be offered with?
I don't see that question. If you could copy it into the everyone, I think that might have been just sent to you.
It may be. So let me see if I can copy everyone, paste.
As we're waiting for this, just something else, I'm reading some of the comments about how to talk about being embarrassed about your period. This is a time where it's really important for the instructor to use their best judgment about personal stories to share. For example, I do share the fact that I didn't get my first period until I was 16 years old. That's something that's not giving them too much information where they're learning something inappropriate about me, but they're learning something that can then help them feel more comfortable and get to know me and to understand something about me and how that impacts how I teach about Teen Star. Does that make sense? So those are good examples of stories that you can use your judgment to share to help connect.
Yeah.
Can we offer the girls charting help if we're not accredited NFP instructors? So we are not the number one thing to remember is we are not teaching the girls NFP. We are teaching them how to observe wetness and dryness, right? We're giving them the basic bones of one day being able to learn NFP. So we're not going over their chart to say, oh, this is the pattern, or this is definitely when you ovulated, or anything like that, where this is so basic. Does that make sense? Sally and Deacon Santi and Liz, please help chime in on that.
Yeah, and to address the issue, even though Teen Star has definitely, Sister Hannah responded to John and Lynn Billings' challenge to basically teach girls in that particular moment to chart, and we are mostly associated with the Billings because of that history. And notice the colors of our suggested days of charting correspond to the Billings, which is very similar to Creighton and other methods. We want to shy away from making this about a method, and so we obviously welcome anybody that teaches NFP because of their expertise. However, you have to watch out that the only moment where you could possibly teach them would be with very explicit parental consent to teach them NFP as a separate altogether thing. Towards the end of our curriculum, we have a place where we actually allow for a discussion about methods of natural family planning. And so I would definitely stay away from teaching them a method until they're much further along in the curriculum. They're going to ask, and you might want to say, well, with your parents' consent and explicit consent, I can refer you to someone that can teach you a method, or depending on whether you're one, that you could be the one teaching.
So I like.
Sorry, I just would be very, very cautious if you are very experienced at charting, to really allow the girls to experience it in their own way, and just keep it as simple as possible. And to be aware that some girls may not want to share their charts right off the bat. Actually, they usually don't. What I have experienced is, after we kind of review this a lot more throughout the rest of the units, and by the time we get towards the end of the class, they're all sharing. But it's really, really important to allow the process and allow that experience to unfold naturally. So just be aware, if you are experienced with teaching NFP or charting yourself, just hold back on what you know and let the girls experience.
So I like to think we're teaching fertility awareness to the 8th grade and high schoolers. To the college kids, more the Billings, but I also introduce the other types of methods too. So, but that's different.
Right.
The other thing is, my transgender student really refused to chart. She hated her body so much.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense.
And we focus a
Actually
lot
taught
on
a friend who had body dysmorphia about charting, and it helped her cure her body dysmorphia. So it's powerful stuff that we're teaching, as you all know, and it's why you're all here. So,
and we focus more on it's a sign of health. It's, understanding. Sorry, Molly, go ahead.
No. And similar to what Deacon Santi was talking about, teaching the young boys about their emotion charting. Why are we doing this? Let's help us problem solve, right? When you know you're going to get your period, that will help you plan when you're going to work on your science fair project, and how your field hockey game this weekend, you're going to get your period before your field hockey game. Okay, how does that impact how you're going to eat and sleep and drink and stay hydrated and things like that? So that's really why we're doing this for them, because we're working with 12-year-olds who are interested in their 12-year-old lives, right? We're not interested in teaching 30-year-olds who are about to get married about how to family plan, right? We're teaching 12-year-olds who have soccer practice and ballet and big papers to write. We care about their life, and we care about how this information impacts their life. This is important because one day you'll be interested in having a family. Of course, we have those conversations, but that's really not what we focus on, because that's really not their life right now. And we want to focus on their life right now.
There are two questions also that made, or one is a comment, which I think is very valid, that the green stamps seem to give a green light during infertile times. And so that could possibly be something that, and in reality, we do allow for the girls to pick out their colors, whatever color they want.
Whatever color they want.
So in a sense, we have this as a suggestion, but not as a. And then the other question has to do with mothers that don't chart might actually they might have some pushback about charting because they don't chart themselves. And Liz has actually answered part of that. Mothers start charting. That's true.
And I never get pushback from those mothers. It's
No,
really, it's really the opposite.
yeah,
That-
me too.
yeah.
I've had mothers who talk to me and say, the very beginning of class, my daughter wants to be in this class. I want her to be in this class, but I just want to let you know that I have an IUD and I like it. Say, wow, thanks for letting your daughter be in this class. Cool. And just leave it at that, right? And then eventually you see how beautiful their conversations are between the mom and the daughters. Yeah, more than likely you won't receive pushback from the parents, because the parents who really don't want their kids to be in the class won't let their kids be in the class. So you won't be working with those kids, or the kids who do, those parents aren't necessarily going to be as involved. So it's just interesting.
Then I'll find 6 months into the class that those parents change their mind and they want their child in the class.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. They want you to teach again the next year and blah, blah, blah. So it's cool. All right. We're coming up on, we have 4 minutes. Okay. Deacon Santi, what would you like me to do in the last 4 minutes of the class?
Well, I think what I'm going to just basically mention very quickly is, so unit 5 and unit for the boys and the girls is just a flip-flop of what we just did, with a few adjustments. So it's not, they're not identical, but they're basically looking at, so for the girls, they're going to learn about the boys' special signs. So they're going to also learn. Now they do have a review of their charting that begins to give them some information about themselves as well, because this is still early in charting. It takes about 3 cycles for them to really begin to understand their cycle. Although I think, Molly, correct me if I'm wrong, the young girls that start their cycling during have a even better grasp.
Oh yeah.
So, and then for the boys, we just flip them as well. So there's a information about, for example, physical changes during adolescence. And we actually run for the boys, we give them an exercise. I'm scrolling a little fast, but I think you can see this. I'll open up these units right after we finish today. But you will see that they'll learn how to chart a girl's different menstrual cycles. So they're given, and we actually sometimes even do this with the girls. I have them practice charting a short cycle, a long cycle, a regular cycle, and the boys love it. They really love it. They end up actually, that idea of boys that like to be problem solvers really kicks in. And so you have to try to tell them, okay, challenge them to discover when the girl may have ovulated and that sort of thing. So they really actually enjoy that activity. So over here you can see this is a sample cycles for charting practice, and it describes each day of the cycle. And so you give them a blank chart and you have them do that. Okay. All right. So because we don't have the time, and obviously don't want to put you in a position of getting so overwhelmed, we probably will compensate a little bit with a couple of activities. One of them is I will do another video on understanding female fertility, and we'll give you a charting exercise that, if we go over here, let me also light up number 4.
I just also want to say, while he's pulling that up, it's so important to watch the video. I think I saw Anna had posted both videos. There's one from Spain, but the one that Molly and her mother has done is awesome, and you use it. I use that video actually several times during the course, where you'll start and you'll show it, and then as Molly said, you break it apart and you show it in pieces. But I'll actually show that video about 3 times to the girls throughout the course, because it's just so helpful.
Yeah.
So I would really encourage, just please watch it as you, after we leave, before our next class.
And I tell the students this is also done in Korea, in Korean, and in other languages. Again, the international idea that this is all over the world.
Yes. Yes, that's right. So, okay, now I will be posting an exercise. It's basically, let me show it to you as, let me make sure I get to it. There it is. It's going to be under Unit 5. And I'll show you what it kind of looks like. You'll have to download it. And it's right here. It's this little chart. It's only about cervical mucus. It's not about emotions or, and these are the suggested colors, although you can change them as you prefer. But here are, let me make, can I make this a little bit bigger for you? I don't know. I think I can. There we go. So if you look carefully, you can see descriptions and then a place for you to put one of these stamps. It's an Excel file, so you can actually copy and paste it according to the observation. And so what you want to do is you want to take a look and see if you can obviously fill in the colors according to this code, and then have it ready for discussion on if you can on Monday, as we meet on Monday. Of course, that only gives you a couple of days, but give it a try. Okay, and if you have any questions, please reach out, and no problem at all. There's a comment in the chat. The parish I'm going to be teaching, that is, this course isn't required and it's voluntary. So I'm optimistic about parental participation and excitement for these things. The parents are anything like me, they're going to learn a lot of things they never knew and wish they had when they were their child's age. Okay, thank you. I know, I know. Isn't this, it opened my eyes when I first started with all of this. It is, okay. Any questions? There are quizzes, so we'll open those up. Don't hesitate to do them. Show us you're participating. It's important for us to know that you are engaged in doing this as much as possible, because it is a great responsibility to be able to teach this. And so it's one of those things that we want to really make sure that we are, you're getting the best possible ability to teach this. Okay. All right. Any other questions or concerns? Molly, Sally, even Liz, or anyone?
All set. Thanks again for a great Saturday.
Thank you
for your time on a weekend morning. We're so grateful and looking forward to seeing you on Monday.
You guys are amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I know it's a little bit brutal learning on Zoom. I understand that.
It's rough teaching on Zoom too.
I tell you, we're looking forward to opening up and doing face-to-face workshops. The problem sometimes is just really being able to get people to fly into one place, and the cost is higher when that happens. So there's some benefits, but also lots of unfortunate challenges that are presented with Zoom. But, how about we say together, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. And if Father, if you're still around, can you give us a blessing? I don't know if I see you.
May the grace of Almighty God descend upon you, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God bless.
God bless you all. Have a good rest of the weekend. Thank you. Thank you for your patience, and we'll see you Monday.
Happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day. That's right.
Father's Day.
Father's Day, you guys.
Yes, that's right. Spoil your husbands and your priests and your fathers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.